Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Today I will be reading from the Eclectic Teachings of Luang Por Chah, Chapter 3, page 21, Convention and Liberation, and it's been previously published elsewhere with the title Suppositions and Release, and was previously translated by Ajahn Jeff. The things of this world are merely conventions of our own making. Having established them, we get lost in them and refuse to let go, giving rise to clinging to personal views and opinions. This clinging never ends. It is samsara, flowing endlessly on. It has no completion. Now, if we know conventional reality, then we'll know liberation. If we clearly know liberation, then we'll know convention. This is to know the Dhamma. Here there is completion. Take people, for instance. In reality, people don't have any names. We are born naked into the world. Our names arise only through convention. I've contemplated this and seen that if you don't know the truth of this convention, it can be really harmful. It's simply something we use for convenience. Without it, we couldn't communicate. There would be nothing to say, no language. I've seen Westerners when they sit in meditation together in the West. When they get up after sitting, men and women together, sometimes they go and touch each other on the head. There's a footnote that says, to touch a person's head in Thailand is usually considered an insult. When I saw this, I thought, if we cling to convention, it gives rise to defilements right there. If we can let go of convention, give up our opinions, we are at peace. Like the generals and colonels, men of rank and position, who come to see me. When they come, they say, "Oh, please touch my head." Footnote. It is considered auspicious in Thailand to have one's head touched by a highly esteemed monk. If they ask like this, there's nothing wrong with it. They're glad to have their heads touched. But if you tap their heads in the middle of the street, it'd be a different story. This is because of clinging. So I feel that letting go is really the way to peace. Touching a head is against our customs, but in reality, it's nothing. When they agree to having it touched, there's nothing wrong with it, just like touching a cabbage or a potato. Accepting, giving up, letting go, this is the way of lightness. Wherever you're clinging, there's becoming in birth right there. There's danger right there. The Buddha taught about convention, and he taught to undo convention in the right way, and so reach liberation. This is freedom. Not to cling to conventions. All things in this world have a conventional reality. Having established them, we should not be fooled by them, because getting lost in them really leads to suffering. This point concerning rules and conventions is of utmost importance. One who can get beyond them is beyond suffering. However, they are a characteristic of our world. Take Mr. Bunma, for instance. He used to be just one of the crowd, but now he's been appointed the district commissioner. It's just a convention, but it's a convention we should respect. It's part of the world of people. If you think, oh, before we were friends, we used to work at the tailor's together, and then you go and pat him on the head in public, he'll get angry. It's not right, he'll resent it. So we should follow the conventions in order to avoid giving rise to resentment. It's useful to understand convention. Living in the world is just about this. Know the right time and place. Know the person. Why is it wrong to go against conventions? It's wrong because of people. You should be clever, knowing both convention and liberation. Know the right time for each. If we know how to use rules and conventions comfortably, then we are skilled. But if we try to behave according to the higher level of reality in the wrong situation, this is wrong. Where is it wrong? It's wrong with people's defilements, that's where. People all have defilements. In one situation we behave one way, In another situation, we must behave in another way. We should know the ins and outs because we live within conventions. Problems occur because people cling to them. If we suppose something to be, then it is. It's there because we suppose it to be there. But if you look closely, in the absolute sense, these things don't really exist. As I have often said, before we were laymen and now we are monks. We lived within the convention of layman, and now we live within the convention of monk. We are monks by convention, not monks through liberation. In the beginning, we established conventions like this, but if a person merely ordains, this doesn't mean he overcomes defilements. If we take a handful of sand and agree to call it salt, does this make it salt? It is salt, but only in name, not in reality. You couldn't use it to cook with. Its only use is within the realm of that agreement, because there's really no salt there, only sand. It becomes salt only through our supposing it to be so. This word liberation is itself just a convention. Excuse me. But it refers to that which is beyond conventions. Having achieved freedom, having reached liberation, we still have to use convention in order to refer to it as liberation. If we didn't use convention, we couldn't communicate, so it does have its use. For example, people have different names, but they are all people just the same. If we didn't have names to differentiate between each other, and we wanted to call out to somebody standing in a crowd saying, "Hey, person," it would be useless. You couldn't say who would answer you because they're all person. But if you called, "Hey, John," then John would respond and the others wouldn't. Names fulfill just this need. Through them we can communicate. They provide the basis for social behavior. So you should know both convention and liberation. Conventions have a use, but in reality there really isn't anything there. Even people are non-existent. They are merely groups of elements, born of causal conditions, growing dependent on conditions, existing for a while, then disappearing in the natural way. No one can oppose or control it. But without conventions, we would have nothing to say. We'd have no names, no practice, no work. Rules and conventions are established to give us a language, to make things convenient, and that's all. Take money, for example. In olden times, there weren't any coins or notes. They had no value. People used to barter goods, but those things were difficult to keep, so they created money using coins and notes. Perhaps in the future we'll have a new king decree that we don't have to use paper money, we should use wax, melting it down and pressing it into lumps. We'll say this is money and use it throughout the country. Let alone wax, they might even decide to make chicken dung the local currency. All the other things can't be money, just chicken dung. Then people would fight and kill each other over chicken dung. And this is the way it is. You could use many examples to illustrate convention. What we use for money is simply a convention that we have set up. It has its use within that convention. Having decreed it to be money, it becomes money. But in reality, what is money? Nobody can say. When there is a popular agreement about something, then a convention comes about to fulfill the need. The world is just this. This is convention, but to get ordinary people to understand liberation is really difficult. Our money, our house, our family, our children, and our relatives are simply conventions that we have invented, but really, seen in the light of Dhamma, they don't belong to us. Maybe if we hear this, we don't feel so good, but reality is like that. These things have value only through the established conventions. If we establish that it doesn't have value, then it doesn't have value. If we establish that it has value, then it has value. This is the way it is. We bring convention into the world to fulfill a need. Even this body is not really ours. We just suppose it to be. We just suppose it to be so. It's truly just an assumption on our part. If you try to find a real, substantial self within it, you can't. There are merely elements which are born, continue for a while, and then die. Everything is like this. There's no real, true substance to it. But it's proper that we use it. It's like a cup. At some time, the cup must break, but while it's there, you should use it and look after it well. It's a tool for your use. If it breaks, there is trouble, so even though it must break, you should try your utmost to preserve it. And so we have the four supports, footnote, robes, alms food, lodgings, and medicines, which the Buddha taught again and again to contemplate. They are the supports on which a monk depends to continue his practice. As long as you live, you must depend on them, but you should understand them. Don't cling to them, giving rise to craving in your mind. Convention and liberation are continually related like this. Even though we use convention, don't place your trust in it as being the truth. If you cling to it, suffering will arise. The case of right and wrong is a good example. Some people see wrong as being right and right as being wrong, but in the end, who really knows what's right and what's wrong? We don't know. Different people establish different conventions about what's right and what's wrong, but the Buddha took suffering as his guideline. If you want to argue about it, there's no end to it. One says right, another says wrong, one says wrong, another says right. In truth, we don't really know right and wrong at all. But at a useful, practical level, we can say that right is not to harm oneself and not to harm others. This way fulfills a constructive purpose for us. After all, rules, conventions, and liberation are simply dhammas. One is higher than the others, but they go hand in hand. There's no way that we can guarantee that anything is definitely like this or like that. So the Buddha said to just leave it be. Leave it be as uncertain. However much you like it or dislike it, you should understand it as uncertain. Regardless of time and place, the whole practice of Dhamma comes to completion at the place where there is nothing. It's the place of surrender, of emptiness, of laying down the burden. This is the finish. It's not like the person who says, "Why is the flag fluttering in the wind?" I say it's because of the wind. Another person says it's because of the flag. The other retorts that it's because of the wind, and there's no end to this. The same as the old riddle, which came first, the chicken or the egg? There's no way to reach a conclusion. This is just nature. All these things we say are merely conventions. We establish them ourselves. If you know these things with wisdom, then you'll know impermanence, suffering, and not self. This is the outlook which leads to enlightenment. Training and teaching people with varying levels of understanding is really difficult. Some people have certain ideas. You tell them something and they don't believe you. You tell them the truth and they say it's not true. I'm right, you're wrong, there's no end to this. If you don't let go, there will be suffering. I've told you before about the 4 men who go into the forest. They hear a chicken crowing. Kakadee! One of them wonders, is that a rooster or a hen? 3 of them say together, it's a hen. But the other doesn't agree. He insists it's a rooster. How could a hen crow like that, he asks. They retort, well, it has a mouth, hasn't it? They argue and argue until the tears fall, really getting upset over it, but in the end they're all wrong. Whether you say a hen or a rooster, they're only names. We establish these conventions, saying a rooster is like this, a hen is like that, a rooster cries like this, a hen cries like that, and this is how we get stuck in the world. Remember this. Actually, if you just say that there's really no hen and no rooster, then that's the end of it. In the field of conventional reality, one side is right and the other side is wrong, but there will never be complete agreement. Arguing till the tears fall has no use. The Buddha taught not to cling. How do we practice non-clinging? We practice simply by giving up clinging. But this non-clinging is very difficult to understand. It takes keen wisdom to investigate and penetrate this, to really achieve non-clinging. When you think about it, whether people are happy or sad, content or discontent, doesn't depend on their having little or having much. It depends on wisdom. All distress can be transcended only through wisdom, through seeing the truth of things. So the Buddha exhorted us to investigate, to contemplate. This contemplation means simply to try to solve these problems correctly. This is our practice. Like birth, old age, sickness, and death, they are the most natural and common of occurrences. The Buddha taught to contemplate birth, old age, sickness, and death, but some people don't understand this. What is there to contemplate, they say? They're born, but they don't know birth, and they'll die, but they don't know death. A person who investigates these things repeatedly will see. Having seen, he will gradually solve his problems. Even if he still has clinging, if he has wisdom and sees that old age, sickness, and death are the way of nature, he will be able to relieve suffering. We study the Dhamma simply for this, to cure suffering. There isn't really much as the basis of Buddhism. There's just the birth and death of suffering, and this the Buddha called the truth. Birth is suffering, old age is suffering, sickness is suffering, and death is suffering. People don't see this suffering as the truth. If we know truth, then we know suffering. This pride in personal opinions, these arguments, they have no end. In order to put our minds at rest, to find peace, we should contemplate our past, the present, and the things which are in store for us, like birth, old age, sickness, and death. What can we do to avoid being plagued by these things? Even though we may still have a little worry, if we investigate until we know according to the truth, all suffering will abate because we will no longer cling to things.
Something funny like along those same lines. Ajahn Sudanto relating one time he had a conversation with a Thai monk in Thailand, and they got in kind of. Ajahn Sudanto was trying to teach the Thai monk how to say apple, and the Thai monk was like, "It's not pronounced that way. It's apun. That's the right way to say it." And Ajahn Sudanto was like, "No, it's apple." The monk was like, this Western monk doesn't even know how to speak his own language. Just couldn't see it that way.
It strikes me, American culture is so, looks down on convention and, sort of all the convention of restraint and ways of acting and sort of etiquette so much, reacting against sort of our Puritan, the backlash against the sort of Puritan ethic. But it strikes me that it really misses a few things, and one is that people, especially when people kind of look at our tradition critically for how strict we are around all these little conventions that we hold. And it strikes me that there's a few blind spots there. One is that people even in the West, like actually live in the midst of a lot of convention. It's just they're blind to it. You know, like just in terms of what they worship, you know, like what's on the top shelf of, you know, occupies the highest place in most houses is, you know, like the liquor cabinet, and then, you know, the altar of like the TV in the living room, you know, like there's definitely kind of these sort of hidden conventions, and it's just like in our tradition we make it very explicit of, you know, what we're kind of aiming towards. And then also it seems like in our tradition, like how tightly we hold convention has a lot to do with if you're going to be, you know, leaning into the unknown and sort of falling apart internally, having that security around conventions even more helpful and important. It's kind of like leaning out over an abyss, you know, and like you have to hold even tighter to the rope. And so like for me, like just for example in winter retreat, like having this fixed schedule and really knowing what I do in the vinaya and all these like little conventions are like so helpful when you're kind of falling apart internally, which I think is a lot of this internal work, you know. So I just really appreciate how our tradition uses in convention very intentionally as a support, but it's hard to explain to people who kind of have just lived in, you know, especially American culture.
That's a very good point, and I like how you say altar of the TV, because then that's a very good description, because then like anything that comes out from it too, we then repeat it to others as truth. So like anything we see on the TV is sort of taken as truth.
Yeah, I think it's probably, I mean, you know, there's a lot in our culture that, you know, worships things that are unskillful. I think, you know, it probably not just American or Western culture too. There's even in, you know, other countries, Western or Asian countries, even like Thailand, there's, you know, certain conventions that are picked up that are also unskillful. It's just that our tradition does have more of a presence in those countries, so that they recognize and appreciate, you know, the values that come from the monastic form, if it's, you know, if it's followed well. There's a lot of monastic forms that aren't followed well there too, but yeah, but I think probably every culture has its own peculiar religions.
There's a movie with Will Ferrell as a race car driver, and he crashes his car and he's running around on fire and he's like, "Save me, Tom Cruise."
And it's interesting how powerful it is. Like, people die, you know what I mean, from these gestures, from offending somebody else, just purely on conventions. I've had multiple times somebody counting on their hands in Thailand, and it ends up in they're giving me the middle finger, and there's no intention, and it's always just strikes me as funny. It's like, wow, it's so powerful, that gesture. Whereas I accidentally touched a monk's head early on. I was also a monk at the time. He had something on his head, whereas in America, someone had something on their head. It's very, you know, nice thing to do. And the look in his eyes was like, I was like, I shouldn't have done that, should I? No, never do that. Yeah, it's amazing. So like so many of Ajahn Chah's teachings, it's so simple, you know, but it's so powerful, and it's such a deep teaching, sort of exposing the lie with all these conventions.
Also just the internal integrity of like the structure of convention around our tradition. You know, like you're talking to some other monastic traditions about like, you know, some of how we hold certain rules which seem really, you know, off the point, like very strictly, and seeing a certain skeptical look in their eyes, but that there's something to like, if you start to, the slippery slope argument has validity, if you start to let go of certain things, then a lot of things slide, and just all the little things we hold maybe a bit too tightly for, someone looking on from the outside, it all justifies itself to me by the fact that we've managed to not touch money still, and like the fact that holding the integrity of the vinaya as a whole has allowed us to protect that one point, and others as well, but even just that for me justifies all the other minutiae, which I have to get lay people to like stab an orange before I eat it, like all that stuff. It's all justified by that, by the fact that those things protect those gems.
I was just thinking that, I think kind of related to what Tanisma mentioned earlier, that there's kind of a pattern of thought in kind of American or Western kind of counterculture thinking, which is like freedom comes from being free from conventions, like kind of like the hippie or that free love, that sort of thing. And there's a lot of spiritual teachings that are kind of take that stance, like it's conventional morality that's like holding people down, and you need to be free from that, like, and the freedom comes through like acting in ways that are kind of contrary to that. And I think a lot of people kind of take that perspective, but it usually doesn't work out. It seems like it doesn't work out so well for them. So that's one kind of misunderstanding I think people could have, is seeing the vinaya, the way we practice the vinaya, and how that, like Ajahn Chah was saying, actually release or liberation comes from seeing the conventions and knowing them what they are. You don't have to like not follow them. It's within following them in a wholesome way. It comes through the wisdom of seeing them. But it's kind of it's definitely a hard point for people to see, I would think.
Yeah. I think Ajahn Chah also made the point of how we hold those conventions internally, and that's important too. And, because like a lot of I think the anti-establishment type reaction of the 60s, the 70s, the free love, all that kind of stuff was in reaction to, conventions that were held so tightly that they, sometimes punished other people, or caused harm through holding them tightly in a way that was, repressive or very punishing. So the pendulum swings one way and then it swings the other way. But so that we do have these conventions and we realize the importance of them and we hold to them, because they are so important. As we talk about them in our tradition. And we do that with the knowledge that, in and of themselves, it's not like clinging to rites and rituals just for the sake of doing it, but that there's a purpose. And if we live that and if we understand that, then that eventually gets communicated so that people don't see that we're holding it in an unskillful way, but that we're holding it in a very useful, a very skillful way.
For me, an important factor of that has been kind of observing and understanding that like a lot of the cultural conventions that people are reacting to or that are used unskillfully are cultural conventions that they've developed over time, kind of as almost like an emergent. They've like emerged out of all kinds of cultural activities and things like this. And they sort of, my perspective from the world was that like these conventions did not have my best interests at heart. Whether it was, worshiping the television or, the conventions at my job or something like that, it was to serve, other people and other things, or to serve the culture as a whole, but it sort of impinged upon or limited me in ways that I didn't think was helpful or appropriate. But then coming here, we find that yes, some of the conventions are strange or strict or whatever, or foreign, most of them foreign, you spend here time long enough, you spend enough time here, and you realize that actually most of them are there for our benefit. You know, they were crafted by a wise, compassionate being for our benefit, and they're carried on by wise, compassionate beings seeking our benefit. And so that shift of being able to, it's like almost like it's like the quality of conventions that we use, that, you know, it's like increases the ability for us to use them skillfully and then to see through them. But I think it'd be a lot harder to sort of see through or to really come to understand conventions when they aren't so skillfully crafted, maybe.
Or come from a selfish place.
One thing about that talk that I like is regarding conventions is that just everything coming out of my mouth is a convention. Every single word is, and thought, like this is this is that. All the building blocks of these more complex conventions are built out of conventions. There's just no to be out here in the world. And I need conventions to tell you this, my thoughts, and it all just starts from there and just builds up into more complex things. I enjoy reflecting on that.
Yeah, and then Ajahn Charles is saying, like, you have to be clever, and then to be clever and intelligent, and then use those conventions while knowing they're just conventions, but knowing the time and place, which convention to use when. So I like that aspect of the talk as well, combined with that.